Good afternoon, everybody. You are very welcome to our final event of the day today. I hope you've been enjoying the festival so far, those of you who have come to other events. And of course, we have events on all day tomorrow in Bray Library. This is our last event of the festival in the Town Hall. So everything in the library tomorrow, just so there's no confusion there. I'm going to hand over to Anne Tannam in a moment, who is going, I'm sure, to ably moderate this event, as she always does. First of all, I'd just like to say that we're doing a collection for Purple House Cancer Support Centre. There's a bucket over there if anybody feels that they would like to contribute. That would be wonderful. And other than that, just enjoy the readings and the discussion. Anne, over to you.
Thanks a million, Tanya. It's kind of exciting, isn't it? You can see it in people's faces. They're like, I'm at the right event. Just to begin, I suppose, on a sad note, and that there were meant to be 4 wonderful writers, but Kieran Goddard from the UK, they suffered a tragedy last night, and he couldn't travel over. He was so apologetic, and he's such a wonderful writer. I'm going to just read some of his work before I hand you over to our wonderful 3 poets today. So Kieran is a poet, but this is his first novel, and it's basically a love story, but it's the simplicity of it, and it's the heartbreaking reality, what goes on inside our heads when love is working and then when love is not working. So I'm going to read you 4 small passages to give you a flavour of, honestly, the brilliance of Kieran's work, an extraordinary writer. We were down listening to Donal Ryan earlier today, and he was talking about in his latest novel that each of his chapters are only 500 words long, and he actually kept it tightly to 500 words. And he talked about the freedom that it gave him and the focus to write in such short bursts. And Kieran, because he was a poet first, he writes, I would say there's only maybe 200 words in each of his chapters, but they pack a punch. The narrative voice, we don't have his name, but the narrative voice is in the first person, and we hear from him all of the time. So this is at the beginning, when things are going well. At my flat, I lied to you, and I told you I was planning to put oil on the front gate. I had no plans to put oil on the front gate. I had never owned gate oil, and I don't know what type of shop you went into if you had to get gate oil. But the gate was really noisy, so I just said it. I was nervous. I felt like a bonfire that had been put together by someone who was in a rush and who was also stupid. As if they had put bits of rubbish in with the sticks, and the sticks weren't even arranged properly. I was the type of bonfire that burned weirdly and too fast, and then someone would have to ask what the smell was and why the smoke was such a strange colour. I put water in mugs. Do you think the brain can really tell the difference between losing something it has had and losing something that it wanted? I remember that you held my wrist and then guided my fingers inside you, and that I was hungry for things that were not bran flakes or apples. All of the things happened. There were legs and arms and mouths and hands and opening and closing and swallowing and salt. We made all the shapes and we made all the gangling angles. I burnt weirdly and I burnt too fast. After, I looked through the flat to feed us, but there was still only bran flakes and apples. I put more water in mugs. I put clean water in clean mugs. And later on, when unfortunately things aren't going as well, there are always low points. Every week that passes offers up something deeply shit. Mercifully, some of the deeply shit things fade away after a few days, and I never have to think about them again. But sometimes they are so unbelievably shit that they stick around. One such unbelievably shit thing was the time I berated a child in a supermarket. Or, to be more accurate, the time I berated a child in an extremely busy supermarket, and then the child cried very loudly in the extremely busy supermarket. He was in front of me in the queue, packing the last of his mother's shopping into a plastic bag and then handing it to her. I assumed he wasn't paying attention because as the first few items of my shop were scanned through the hasty checkout girl, the child started packing these as well. As soon as I noticed, I asked him to stop. Mate, those beans don't belong to your mum's shop. They are mine, so can you put them back, please? He stuttered a bit. No, you don't understand. I was impatient. I do understand, mate. It's pretty simple. They are my beans, and you need to put them back. Take them out of the plastic bag and put them back. Put the beans back now. The child tentatively took the can of beans out of the plastic bag, welling up as he did it. But he didn't leave. He just stood there, crying louder and louder. I looked at the checkout girl for support, but she was just looking back at me in what I can only describe as pure disgust. He's packing bags for the Boy Scouts. If you didn't want to give him a donation, that's fine, but there's no need to shout at him. The fucking child was still crying. I didn't mean to shout at him. I just thought he was stealing my fucking beans. How was I supposed to know he was collecting for the Boy Scouts? She basically spat at me. Well, it says Boy Scouts on his jumper in big letters, and there's one at every checkout. The child was still crying at that exact moment. I decided to abandon my beans and leave the extremely busy supermarket. I think about the crying child every day. He's probably still there crying, the sneaky, bean-stealing fuck. And the last I'll read, it's towards the end, and as there's always movement in a love story, even after heartache, there's a sense of movement here too. Like I said, I think I am falling apart, and it is incredibly boring, and nothing like the way I think falling apart would be from having spent most of my teenage years reading books about people falling apart and listening to music about people falling apart, and occasionally lying to women and saying that I was falling apart too, exactly like the people who were falling apart in the books and the songs. My falling apart looks mostly like chasing the sun around, moving throughout the day as to be directed under it as I can possibly be. And it looks occasionally like asking bird questions. None of the birds answer me, but some of them are polite enough to hang around for a bit and nod silently at me. At one particular moment, my falling apart looks like me falling over, putting my hands out to stop myself and ending up shattering one of my wrists again. Because I am extremely lonely and also falling apart, people think I have deliberately hurt myself and come to visit me during the 2 days I spend in hospital. When people visit me, I say the same thing over and over again. I say I'm totally fine, and I say that it's really nice that they've come to see me, and also that I am totally fine. There is a day when I want to write an essay about how the meaning of love is wanting someone to have the biggest, most free life, and how usually there is also a silent parenthesis attached that says something like, but only if it includes me. There is a day when I think about shaving my head, which is barely any hair left in it anyway. And there is a day when I think about starting to dress in a way where it isn't entirely clear if I am flamboyant or I'm actually wearing a costume. In the end, I do none of these things. Instead, I reread an old essay that I wrote. And I'll leave it there. The wonderful Kieran Goddard. So the event is body, shame and identity. And this fascinating, explosive cluster of themes are in the safe hand of our trio of writers here. And for somebody like me who grew up in the 70s and 80s in Ireland when shame ruled our days, I wish that their writing had been available to us back then, to give voice and validity to inner worlds we thought we could never or should never be spoken of. Thankfully, times have changed, and come at the hour, come at the writers. And I think on behalf of all of us in the room packed in today, thank you for your courage and your authenticity and the vulnerability of your collective bodies of work. Shame is, and this is Brené Brown, who's famous for her shame research, says, it is an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love, belonging and connection. It shows up physically as an implosion inward, a wishing to disappear. And so it's no surprise that it reveals itself in relation to our bodies and our sense of self. And the antidote to shame is empathy. And what could be better than literature to demonstrate and cultivate deep and sustaining empathy? These three wonderful writers at different stages in their writing careers, intimidatingly talented, even looking at them, all focused on producing work that jumps off the page and enters not just the mind, but the body, creating a visceral and exhilarating somatic experience for those that dare to engage with it. So I'm going to begin by introducing Luke Morgan. He is an emerging Irish poet. I always think it's funny, isn't it, emerging? I just kind of imagine a head coming around a door. So he's an emerging Irish poet, born in 1994, and his debut collection, Honest Walls, was published by Arlene House in 2016, and his eagerly anticipated second collection, Beast, was published in 2022. He was the winner in his category in the inaugural Throchra Poetry Ireland competition and the National Student Poetry Award in 2012 from Windows Publications. And in addition to writing poetry and fiction, Luke is also an award-winning filmmaker and theatre director, and he lives and works in Galway. And he's interested in mental health, the animal kingdom, kind of present-day Ireland, and the experience and youth. And his poems have been described as an economy of language, a voice observant and detached, showing us new and sophisticated ways of showing us what we already have seen, and that's from Poetry Ireland Review. And a poet, Victoria Kennefick, I've never heard of her. She said his poems are unsettling and constantly surprising. And in Beast, he writes about the wildness that exists within us. And he poses the question, what makes us animals? And I think of that line from Beauty and the Beast, where they ask, and whoever could love a beast? And I think that question is wrapped into yours. So without further ado, Mr. Luke Morgan, take to the stage.
I know poetry is sometimes described as the fast food of language, but I never thought I'd be walking into a McDonald's to read some poems. Thanks for coming along, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you to David and Tanya for inviting me and for all they do to give a platform to writers like us. It is such an honour, and I'm not just saying this, to read and to share the stage tonight with two of genuinely my favourite poets, Victoria and Molly, and they're really nice people to boot as well. So I'm really thrilled to be here. My name is Luke, and body, shame and identity. Let's go on a rip-roaring adventure for the next 12 minutes. Are you all strapped in? There's a seatbelt on your seat there. I'm just going to start the timer just in case I go over time. I was recently in Nepal for a month. I just got back about 2 or 3 days ago. And I was there for a month, and I didn't bring my hair clippers with me. And by the end of the month, it was very, very patently obvious that I had a very... my pattern male baldness was showing up, something shocking. It's been about 2 years since I bit the bullet, and in the spirit of, you can't fire me, I quit, shaved my head so it looked like it was my idea. But it made me think, it is sort of fair game. You're fair game for a joke if you're a lad and you start balding in your 20s. And I think that's interesting because, it's a different standard applies to us than applies to women who are in a similar situation, because it's easy to forget that it's not a voluntary thing that happens, and a lot of us go through it. It reminded me of that old biblical story of Samson and how losing the hair is this symbolic loss of strength. And when you see a film where a character has cancer, there's always that scene where they take the shears to their own head, and it's seen as a really, really tragic thing. So I wanted to explore that in this poem, this first poem in my new collection, Beast. I wanted to explore my brief life through my hair. So this is a brief history of hair, and it comes with the quote from the Bernstein Medical Journal. Hair plays a key role in the defense mechanisms of most fur-bearing animals. A brief history of hair. Once upon a time, I climbed an iron gate and got my forehead licked by a heifer. Most of the saliva came out in the shower, but there remained a cowl above my eyebrow. Timid at events, I'd allow relatives to praise what I did not create. Soon my quiff was lost beneath some quills I stole from porcupines in the garden, which started stabbing me to harden my scalp against a bully's insults. Yet, behind the courts, a girl once raised my pulse by stroking them aside until they stilled. Next, I had a peacock block my lonely climb before the hill of Doon, so I offered follicles of hair. In return, he prospered, made his dazzling nest in my trousers. On the internet, in one too many browsers, I gazed at others, not content with mine. Dad came to my rescue when the time was near, and strands began to fade from my thin crown. Naked mole rats scared me, vultures stared me down, but I realized what was needed. Lifting honest shears, advice at long last heeded, I shaved away my guises without fear. Thank you. You've heard of unsolicited dick pics, but have you heard of unsolicited dick poems? So this next one, it's a very formative experience, as a young man, coming to terms with your body as you're going through puberty. And a lot of this book deals with some of the anecdotes from my past and helping me trying to reframe some things that I went through with in an attempt to sort of reach across the divide, as literature should, right? And we're talking about bodies, we're talking about shame, we're talking about identity. So this one goes out to everybody who's had to come to terms with their own armadillo. This is Armadillo. Here's how he'll arrive. Not with a thud, but a nuzzle, so slight you'll barely notice him. In Mrs. Dively's geography class, learning about rock formations, no less. You'll never wear loose boxers again. Hiding from a hall roll of loud students in the furthest cubicle, the one with a thick stone wall on one side, he will unfurl in your terrified hands. Look up at you, beg to be protected. Curl back into a ball then, still too visible behind your trousers. All right there, Lukey. Lads will stop your heart at the lockers. Smile knowingly when you claim it's just a seam in the fabric. Listen for him that first night. Make a locked room ambient. Breathe onto palms to try and coax him, but know he is unpredictable and will emerge at the most confusing of times. Stupid o'clock on a freezing bus, mid-quadratic equation after lunch in a changing room full of bony classmates. You will lose him on a day in January when a girl with tamed fire for hair walks to you across the green of your estate. Don't panic. Play some Stevie Wonder on the old hi-fi in the living room. Let him go to her. Feel his gentle weight leave your body, and don't for a second be sad that he does not look back. This next poem is called The Last of the Rhinos, and it went through many, many drafts while I was trying to figure out and express and have the courage to express what I wanted to say. It's a poem about porn. As a young man these days, unfortunately, you learn a lot about your body through porn. And it can be an incredibly lonely experience. And it's something that's not really talked about, that people are quite embarrassed to talk about. And I figure it's a good opportunity to read a poem like this at an event that Bray Literary Festival have been so great to pioneer. So I had gone through many drafts of this poem, and it wasn't really working. And then, actually, Victoria shared something on Twitter. She shared an article, and I haven't told her this, but she shared an article on Twitter. I know. But it was an article that actually expressed very potently what I was trying to say. because I know, like, there's writers in the room, you know that sometimes you have the inclination to kind of dig with the pen, but you're not really sure how to express or what it is you're trying to express. This article was about just exactly this, how, you know, this generation are learning about our bodies through, you know, the medium of porn, and that there isn't enough sex education being done. And, you know, as a young man, it is quite a lonely experience when that's the case. So this is, then I threw in a few rhinos, as you do, because it's a book called Beast. And this is the poem that's resulted. It's The Last of the Rhinos. While the final rhinos are being sniped, I'm learning about my body through porn. The glow of the laptop, a cold sun, another humongous body turned by forklift. Teachers, nature documentary presenters, my friend stopping by a ditch en route home from the zoo to have a piss. I begged them to turn around and reassure me. Google says 5.1 inches, so I aim steel rulers against me, careful not to hit a vein and bleed out over my grey uniform. I want to close tabs where pleasure-wrinkled foreheads look like heat-dried hide, but the question is how to look on as the next beast falls and, in the poached silence, tell myself I'm not yet the last of my species. I, when I was 19 years old, woke up in the middle of the night when I was babysitting my cousins with furious heart palpitations. And I thought, it was terrifying. I thought I was going to die. And I went to my Aunt Joanne, who's sadly no longer with us, drove me to the doctors that morning. I got hooked up to a bunch of wires, and it was over the next couple of weeks established that I had some sort of an electrical misstep in my heart that was going to require surgery in 10 years. I don't know, I'm not sure if that's still the case, but I'm approaching now that point, and it's quite scary, you know, feeling like you're about to go under heart surgery. But over the years, I've had to learn to come to terms with this little pet in my chest, or my rodent, as I like to refer to him. And he's mischievous, he scurries inside me at the most inconvenient of times, but ultimately, he is mine. And this poem is for him. This is called Rodent. I woke to feel his nimble claws inside me and scratched away the thoughts of my own death. My Aunt Joanne, the first resort next door, pressed a hand against my wheeling chest to find a frightened creature racing there. Next day, I felt a nurse spread cold blue gel, and for the first time in my early life, could curse my misbehaving pet on screen. We'll need to make a cut right here, she said, but not before you're 29 years old. I nailed some wood against my rib cage then and sought the noise to hide me from his squeaks. When that backfired, I tried to pawn him off, showed him to some strangers after dark who turned him upside down until he squealed. The day I lay my head upon your chest, I heard a scuttle faint and turned to look. A grey-haired thing stared back with beady eyes. This once forgotten pest, despite my best, had run me here with all his furry might. Thank you. You go through breakups. Life happens. Life goes on. I think as a young man, though, there is this sort of shame of admitting that your heart is broken, or when something happens to you, that it's almost like this, it's very difficult, I think, as a young man to just come out and say to somebody like, oh, I'm sad, or I'm really struggling with this situation. So what do? You go and beat the shit out of someone instead. And this is a poem about beating the shit out of the ocean. This is called Tough Stuff. I can't go beat the shit out of him, and I certainly can't go beat the shit out of her. So I decide to go beat the shit out of the Atlantic instead. Come on, so, it shouts at me, thumping its chest. But, as we all know, the worst kind of person to taunt is the person who is prepared to die. And I'm bloody well prepared to die. So I kick off my shoes, trousers, socks, jocks, and run into it. And it thumps me, but I thump it back. It grabs my balls and puts me into a headlock and pulls my hair until we're both out of breath. And we walk to the shore together, our arms around one another. And it says to me, "You're made of tough stuff, man. You're made of tough stuff." I love that sound. Like you never hear that sound at any other event but a poetry reading. That sort of, after a poem. I always find like that's what I aim for before I stand up. I'm like, I'm gonna get that once. Like just any other context that you'd just be thrown out for being a weirdo. But now it's like, it's so acceptable to do that at a poetry reading for some reason. But thank you. This next poem is a poem about rugby. I don't think there's many poems about rugby out there, if I can find it. So hopefully I have the first one, but if I don't, then you can fact check me at the end. This one's called Pitch, and following on from the last poem, sort of attempt to explore, the male struggle with mental health, while remembering two classmates that we lost, unfortunately, at school. Pitch. Before everything got complicated, there was the Rugby Schools Cup final. I stood on a pitch, more bullet hole mud than grass, and held out my hands. Richter Scale Rogers plucked it from the ruck and ran it himself before hitting the ground. Comerford, carrot top hair, freckles in the shape of a smile, retrieved it and flung it at me, a yell let sail through gleaming gum shield. Within a year, Rogers and Comerford were gone. A shock passed from one to the other before nestling against my chest. The rest of us are still here, our legs pumping against defensive lines, madmen in the sludge, trying to stay on our feet. The other thing that's great to hear at a poetry reading is I'm nearly done. I've got two more poems to go. This is a true story. My dad, who's actually in the audience, can verify this. My parents took in two boys from Chernobyl when we were kids. It was part of some charity some guy in the estate was involved in. So we were quite young at the time, myself and my brother, and these two lads who were older than us at the time came to live with us for a while. And we went to Galway Atlantiquaria, and no word of a lie, they ended up robbing a starfish. They just robbed a starfish from one of the tanks. With all that's going on in the world at the moment, particularly in that region, I think about them and I wonder where they are and what happened to them and what they're doing now and if they're okay. So this is called The Starfish. 3 months after they left, there was a smell in the bedroom of death. 14 and 12, they had no luggage when we collected them, standing on the muddy tiles of Galway train station, except for brown paper bags worn thin with the ghosts of apples. Pennies did the trick. One of our hoodies fitted, though it was tight. They had square-framed glasses, spoke a language full of throat, flashed wide teeth in frequent smiles. They're Chernobyl boys. So good at football, in estate games, you couldn't have them on the same team. Once they had gone home, the smell began to haunt the hall like an invisible enemy. We finally discovered, tucked between a mattress and the wooden panel, a starfish, pulp as bruised fruit, soaked with the sweat of its own decaying, the scaly skin unnatural and cold. We wrapped it inside a bag, and wheeled the bin from our house. We washed the gunk from our hands while our eyes watered, the memory already shriveling, a slow and permanent fade, until all I see now are the square-framed glasses, those wide and terrifying teeth. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. It's genuinely been wonderful to read to you, and thank you for paying attention to my work as attentively as you have, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Molly and Victoria. Thanks again to Anne, yourself, and to the Bray Literary Festival. Thank you. This is the front page, and it's another true story. When did the government bail out the bondholders? I think it was like 2010. I don't know. I'm not up to date on the... Yeah. So anyway, when that happened, my dad and my brother staged a rather innovative protest in Dublin, outside the Department of Finance, and they made the front page. So this is a poem about that, but also about the time, because I remember you'd be going to school in the mornings, so you probably remember like the time well. It's very, like going to school in the mornings, everything was very dreary and drab, and there'd be just these, voices on the radio spelling doom 24/7. And I remember this wonderful event. It just stands out and in that kind of time for me. This is called The Front Page, and I'll leave you with this. When everything crashed and the government bailed out the bondholders, my dad and brother dressed up as tuxedoed pigs and stood outside the Department of Finance, dancing and throwing fake money at everyone. Their skin was painted luminous pink, their stereo blaring. The sight of them toasting glass shoots of apple juice paused the morning commute on Merrion Street for several minutes. They got on the 6-1 news that evening, and when the school secretary rang home the next day to ask why he was absent, my mum replied, "Look at the front page of the Independent." There they were, cardboard snouts, so lifelike, the bright face paint like someone had taken a highlighter pen to all that black and grey. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Luke. And Luke is published by Arlene House, which we had Alan Hayes here yesterday. And it's really known as a feminist press, and it's no surprise that they've published you. So fantastic, Luke. Next up, we have Molly Twomey. And Molly grew up in Lismore, County Waterford, and she graduated in 2019 with an MA in creative writing from University College Cork. She has been published in Poetry Ireland, Review, Banshee, The Irish Times, Dyslexia, The Stinging Fly, and elsewhere. She runs an online international poetry event, Just to Say, sponsored by Jakar Press. And in 2021, she was chosen for Poetry Ireland's introduction series and awarded an Arts Council Literature Bursary. Her debut collection, Raised Among Vultures, published in May 2022, came with Gallery Press. And what's been said about Molly, she's a formidable new talent, and her collection a spectacular and frequently disturbing debut with formal elegance and emotional depth. And Molly writes about eating disorders, their impact on the mind and body, as well as the resilience and strength formed through recovery. And she also writes about autonomy, sex, shame, and relationships. Molly, take to the stage.
Prepared to be disturbed. It's wonderful to be here. I'm just going to pop my timer on so I don't keep you too long. So I was thinking about shame, and I was thinking about the poems that I haven't read before, because I'm still kind of ashamed of them, I'm still kind of ashamed of the topics that come up in them. So I said I'm going to read, there's 2 poems in particular that I want to read. And the first one is called Injury, and it's about exercise addiction. And I think the reason I haven't read it out loud before is because I still kind of struggle with it. And I'm still kind of, I can feel myself shaking when I say that to you. So I'm still kind of ashamed of that. And also because it kind of goes into suicidal ideation, which is really common in eating disorders. I think it's something like 1/4 of deaths by anorexia is suicide. So it's not, I suppose I wouldn't be surprised if someone told me they were feeling that way and they had an eating disorder. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Injury, and it's about going for a run with an injury with my partner. So, Injury. Oh my God, I'm shaky. Okay. I drag it like roadkill, up Shandon Street, down Turner's Cross. My snapped tendon my inflamed arch. You suggest we pause, stretch, go again. I tell you between breaths that if I don't run for exactly 60 minutes, I'll sprint into the lee. The moon, a searchlight on wounded skin. When's the last time you felt that way? You ask. A year since I was found on Jail Bridge. Your patience is the chewed flesh inside my cheek as I refuse to stop for traffic lights or to thumb a gnat from your cornea. You tell me that exercise is the last thing my disorder controls. That right now, I am somewhere, someone else. You almost reach for my arm, but don't. Cool. So the second thing that I'm kind of ashamed of as part of my eating disorder was that I used to spend a lot of time in my family home under the stairs on the computer, in the old computers. And I used to go on a website that was called Tumblr, and I was thinking about it when Luke was talking about porn. I used to go on the computer and save all these pictures that were really unhealthy, pictures of really unhealthy women, and from really dangerous websites. And I used to save them all and stare at them for hours. And I knew it was a secret, like I knew not to tell people. And then I used to delete them all. So I was thinking about porn and the way someone might delete a load of porn. It was my version of that, I suppose. So it's called Tumblr. I was preparing for an apocalypse of bone. Under the stairs, in that currach dark, I saved pictures of ribs and clavicles in monochrome. The way Noah's wife gathered figs and dried plums. She too did not have a name. Like Skinny Girl 16, Pro Anna 98. Our messages fluttered onto each other's screens. We confessed skinned apples, diet cokes, prescribed black coffee, 3,000 sit-ups. I did not have a device of my own, so sat each night deleting laced wrists and pearled spines from my family's files of Christmas quizzes, recipes, and maps of hikes. I shook the modem to get it to work, witnessed those photos tumble into the tiny grey trash can, bone by bone. So then when I was growing up, it wasn't really common to talk about how you were feeling, what was going on. And when we started, kind of the only time we did kind of talk about those things was when we were going through what we would have called a session, which was essentially drinking in a forest in our tracksuits with a big fire on. So this poem is about that. It's called Knives We Used in Our Skin. Who did we imagine would pick up our filters, our shattered glass? Our minds were closed buds in the oaks and pines by the old ice house. We sparked firelighters, threw back naggins, cans of cherry cider. We sucked Bensons and mints, had our first kiss, our last smoke. What did we know of a beer cap in a vixen's throat, or the stomach of a hare gagged with cigarette butts? All we knew for sure was if we drank enough, we could voice the panic attacks we had before maths. The mantras that our bodies were too big, too small, too riddled with spots. We confessed that we watched our mothers dice carrots with the knives we used on our skin, and babysat kids by the river we dreamt of walking into. Here we uncapped what was held so tightly, like a sluice trap after so many winters. Our tense jaws, our cramped hearts were held by the earth's nerves, those roots and vines that quietly lowered the pressure of our blood. The next poem I want to read is about my relationship with my mother. And for me, in this book, it's really the kind of turn in the collection. So it's about trying to maybe take agency for my own body, my own recovery. So a lot of the time in recovery, you kind of, it's complicated and you're very sensitive and you're kind of policing what other people are doing perhaps. And a lot of the time in treatment, there's a lot of focus on the mother and, how the mother raised you and what the mother did. But the reality is I'm an adult. It's and the choices I make now are my choices. So this poem is about that, and it's called Zipping Up My Mother's Dress. Her hands church her midriff. It's a 10, she says. I can't believe it fits. She's been eating raw carrots, counting her steps. What does she want me to say? That I'm glad she's smaller, that she looks great. She used to be a tight 12. That extra flesh was the decade she banned diet books, snacked on almond pastries, and drove me to dietitians and therapists. We revved past joggers, turned up the heat, thanked Christ I stopped getting up to sprint. At the pharmacy, she waded me through carb blockers and keto shakes. I'm trying to accept that her body is hers, not a fire blanket I step on to escape the flames of my worst years. Still, how can almost losing me not be enough to kill her desire to be small? Has she forgotten the ECGs, the blood tests? Before I speak, her arms slide around my hips. She says she's glad that we can shop again, that she can touch me and I don't flinch. Her heart against mine, the contraction and release of a stress toy. She pinches her belly, asks, will she get away with this? I say yes, I'm buying, and tear off the tag so she never knows the price. Cool. So we're flying through them. Thank you for listening to me. So the next poem I'm going to read is I'll just do two more And the next poem I'm going to read is based on my little brother. And I was thinking about how young he was when I was really unwell and how that might have affected him. So it's called I Teach My Brother How to Disappear. What was it like for him to see me, his sister, push away a bowl of honeyed Cheerios for dry spinach leaves, sprinting laps of the garden, swapping crayoned heights on the back door for black lines on the bathroom scales, tracking pounds to lose with a jar of marbles I used to flick and roll. My body like his raptor bath toy that shrank and clogged the drain, made our parents cross and loud as belly ache. Lately, any time he's sick or full, I'm scared I've taught him to refuse a bag of crisps or a bar of Milky Way. How could he learn to listen to his body as I hurled mine against the thin wall between our rooms, our worlds? The only trick I showed him was to disappear. But he's still here on the soccer pitch, scoring a hat-trick in his studded boots, his guarded shins. So my final poem is about my life as it is now, which is lovely. But obviously, there are still some days where it might be a little bit more difficult, but it's still lovely. So it's called All the Things I Want to Do, and it's about my partner and myself. So I wake at 6 to sprint laps of the marina, so I can eat the rye toast you will grill for me later. You hear me tighten my ponytail, not the lace of my shorts. My muscles tensed, facing away from yours. You remind me of all the things I want to do. Parachute in Vancouver. Find the ring in a barren brack. You laugh. Say, even though you hate dried fruit. You plan a marathon of movies. Sister Act, The Rugrats, a Sunday drive to Lochine. You suggest that some morning we'll bake scones or soda bread. I reply that I want real pancakes, and my hand goes to my lips to stuff back the words. I never thought I would get to this stage. Sitting on the corner of your bed, unclipping my sports bra, slipping off my ankle weights. Thank you.
You can all let out that breath that you've been holding. That was just wonderful, Molly. Thank you so much. And we talked about shame earlier. Shame thrives on secrecy. So I'm thinking of the stories that you're sharing, Luke, and that you're sharing, Molly. That's what empathy is. It's wonderful. Thank you. And now, we haven't got time for a last reader. Oh, well, time to go home. So, Victoria Kennefick is a poet, writer and teacher, currently on career break, I think, from Shanagarry, County Cork, now based in County Kerry. Her first collection, Eat or We Both Starve, is published by Carcanet Press and was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize 2021 and the Costa 2021 Poetry Award. It was Book of the Year in The Guardian, The Irish Times, The Sunday Independent, and The White Review, as well as being selected as one of the Telegraph's best poetry books to buy 2021. Her pamphlet, White Whale, Southward Editions 2015, won the Munster Literature Centre Fool for Poetry chapbook competition and the Saboteur Award for Best Poetry Pamphlet. And I could say so much more, but you know what? Get up here and do your thing.
Good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here. I'm just going to pop this on the ground in case it's a bit, or just here. Thank you to Anne for her lovely hosting and introductions, and to David and Tanya for making us feel so welcome, and for this beautiful venue, and to my fellow readers, especially, and Kieran, who I'm sure would much prefer to be here than dealing with what he has to deal with. And I am not for the first time incredibly grateful to be part of this poetry community where we can discuss and bear witness to the difficult, the hidden, the secret, the challenging parts of being human. And I think we've never been more aware of that than we are now after what we've been through and what we continue to go through. And I'm certainly a very changed person after the pandemic. And I think I hope that that knowledge and that awareness will bring all of these things to the surface. So I feel very lucky to have witnessed and experienced those beautiful readings. I am going to start with a poem that starts the collection. And I was really interested in what Molly said about her mother. And I think, you know, talking about bodies and identity and shame, God love the poor mother. God love my poor mother, who would have a poet as a daughter. That's why I dedicated this collection to my mother as recompense. Because it's our first, you know, relationship with another body, and in fact almost predates our relationship with our own. And there is that time where we can't tell our mother's body apart from our own. And what an extraordinary relationship it is, and what a huge responsibility it is for a mother to be a mother. And as a mother now, sometimes I lie awake thinking about what it is to be one and how responsible I feel for the well-being of my small lady, but equally how she is separate from me, and I have to be aware of that too. So this was a poem that was given a trigger warning when I read it on the radio one time. So I'm just going to, you know, it's a bit gross, but you know, that's why we're all here. Learning to eat my mother where my mother is the teacher. Where did I start? Yes, with the heart, enlarged, its chambers stretched through caring. In this body, feeling is what the body is. The alert heart, an alarm rings out in all hours of the night, flashing red and white. Oh, is it in defiance or defeat? I don't know. I eat it anyway, raw, still warm, the size of my fist. I love it. Strange, a vegetarian resorting to cannibalism. She is disgusted with me. Wouldn't you begin with the outside? Sweating, I pry open the rib cage. I do not want to eat her ribs, but I do. Then strip her fingers of meat. I hold them tenderly in my mouth. Watch her blue eyes well up out of love, I assume. I move from heart to ribs, fingers to spongy lungs, buoyant, porous, melt in the mouth. The eyes are tougher than expected. Aqueous humor slithers down my throat. A surprise. It's minty. I know what you're thinking. I left the brain. No, not so. I have consumed that organ piecemeal. Sweet morsel since my teeth came in. It tastes like the sound of sirens you don't know are screaming until they suddenly stop.
Another mother poem. Sorry, Mom. I'm very lucky in that I grew up in Chanagary by the sea. And equally now I live in Tralee. They have accepted me as one of their own, I think. Very near the sea also. And I think once you live near the sea, it kind of becomes a point of reference no matter where you are. And I'm sure people from this beautiful place can attest to that. It just gives a border and a boundary to where you are, and it's not the kind of random looseness of the Midlands, and I don't know what's going on in there. So we went to the beach often as a child, and I still try to as often as I can, and I'm always on the lookout for a message in a bottle, and I have never, ever found one, but one day I found this. Beached whale. At first, I thought that enormous lump of red-brown on the sand was the trunk of some enormous washed-up tree. It was only when I mounted the object, digging my small hands into something far too pliable, that it really hit me. The stale smell of 1,000 low tides and the mute open mouths of the many onlookers with their hysterical dogs, the seagulls circling like squalling clouds, my mother's curlew scream as she ran towards me, disjointed. Astride the whale like this, looking at my mother move through dimensions, planes of distance, I thought of boutique dressing rooms brimming with clothes and tension like gas, expanding, and of two little girls watching their mother cry at her reflection distorted in a fluorescent mirror. The weight of her past made flesh on her hips, the scars of our arrivals barely healed after all this time. My blind hands all over the body, grasping, desperate to hold on to something real, not knowing what that was. I'm fascinated with selfie. This is the identity part now. With selfies, and especially over lockdown, when the book came out, I had to do some shots of myself, and obviously there were no photographers doing that, so I had to do it myself, which made me think about so much about how we want ourselves to be perceived, and how that differs to how others perceive us, obviously, and how I really don't like smiling when I'm taking, it's like very, very stern for some reason. And I realized that I think from a very young age have associated being serious with being cool, which is my shameful part, and that being quite a easy to laughter person is quite embarrassing, because I laugh very easily. So I thought a lot about selfies, and I suppose the different versions of ourselves that we present to ourselves and to each other. Selfie. Sitting alone in the house, eating my fingernails, watching the sky move away. The room is full, versions of me crouching on the floor, balancing on the windowsill, reclining on the pout of my lower lip, asleep in the crease of my eyelid. Not alone, with myself, a snare I have been running from. I do not live the way humans are supposed to. Compare my face to others you know. I fall short. An embarrassing fringe. No matter what face I try on, it's exhausting. All versions shake our heads. There is much to do until we think what we are not, what we are, Victoria's. I see those letters written on envelopes I know are for me because of the shape of that word, that greedy V. It's two arms open wide, ready to accept anything. I went to a convent school, and some of you might have heard of this before, but I enjoyed it, but unfortunately we didn't have the usual boys' school next door, which is just the polite thing to do. But unfortunately, the boys' school was in the next town, next to another convent school. And so both schools in the other town referred to our school as the Virgin Megastore, which was very accurate. And I remember the feeling of embarrassment and shame because we didn't have boys in my family. So I remember sitting on the bus and the boys would come on and just not knowing where to look or what to say. And I always thought boys were really horrible, which is like why I love reading because it's like, oh, boys were human and they were nice and they were going through the same things. But I think segregating the sexes is not a good idea. And so instead of, taking the risk and I fancied them obviously, but talking to the boys that were actually physically there, I fell completely in love with all of the boys in my history books, particularly Michael Collins and also Yeats. If you remember, he was there for the Celtic Twilight period. So he was, my dreamboat. And I used to visit his portrait in the Metropole Hotel in Cork. And just kind of sigh at him. So, God love me. Cork schoolgirl considers the GPO Dublin 2016. I'm standing outside the GPO in my school uniform, which isn't ideal. My uniform is the colour of bull's blood. In this year, I am 16, a pleasing symmetry because I love history. Have I told you that? It is mine, so I carry it in my rucksack. I love all the men of history, sacrificing themselves for Ireland, for me, these rebel Jesuses. I put my finger in the building's bullet holes, poke around in its wounds. I wonder if they feel it, those boys. I hope they do. Their blooming faces pressed flat in the pages of my books. I lick the wall as if it were a stamp. It tastes of bones, this smelly city. Of those boys in uniforms, there's bloody too. I put my lips to the pillar. I want to kiss them all. And I do. I kiss all those boys goodbye. I'm just going to read two more. One is quite short and they're both, one is a little bit longer. I don't usually write long poems, you'll be happy to know, because sometimes it's just cruel to everyone. I'm going to read the next one because I think it is a kind of bridge poem to my newer work. And it is, I suppose, I think of it as such a strange poem now because the strange thing about poetry is when you write it, it's almost like having this weird photograph album of your past feelings and experiences and thoughts and words, and you look back on it and you go, oh my God, you were so naive, or oh my, it's kind of embarrassing. I don't know if you find that too, looking back and going, oh my God, I thought that and I wrote that and I thought this is what was going to happen. So when I wrote this, I hadn't had a child. And I wasn't really necessarily interested, but there was pressure, I suppose, or I felt pressure. And I suppose what culminated in that is I always assumed, and I guess this is what my next book deals with in a way, that people chose the families that they had. Like genuinely, I assumed that if somebody had one child or no children or 10 children, it was by choice. So naive. So I think this poem is kind of like a whisper to later poems that are coming. Family planning. You were tugging at my skirt, age 2, wanting a toy, a spoon from the drawer. You were a few months old, just able to hold your big old baby head up on that teensy neck. It is your birthday. I am sweating and empty. You are greasy white with vernix, rising and falling with my breath. I survived, and you did too. Your father is crying. We are a little family, neat as a pin. Except you are still waiting, Portia or Lucia or May, in parts. I carry a tiny piece I secrete so secretly every month. You grow impatient when water turns that warm and brilliant shade. It is alive while you are not. Daughter-to-be, if you could form your hands into little fists, you would bang on my womb, that carpet-lined waiting room. But your father has your fingers, and I have wrapped your nails up so you can't rip me to ribbons. We keep you apart, even as we come together. But I hear him whisper your name, soft as blame in his sleep. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely gorgeous to be here, and you're a wonderful, wonderful audience, and it's so lovely to see so many familiar faces and faces that I know through social media and so on in real life here. So thank you again to Bray Literary Festival for making it possible. I'm just going to finish with this newer poem, Ram. It's on the kitchen table, the ram's skull. He came in, cradling it in his arms. Don't worry. It's been dead for ages, he whispered, then touched my cheek, a circuit forming between him, me, and the ram that flooded my body with crackling winter fire. He plonked the skull down before vanishing, as he does, into his head, and left this head instead, still on the wood, just bone and horns. And oh, what horns! I imagine his admirers' eyes widening, dark slits expanding to take him all in. The curve of them, looping, intentional things, rigid, strong. I can't look for long, can't reach out to touch them, though it's all I want to do. To be honest, I am scared of the narrow, brittle skull between two magnificent coronets, just a sliver of bone, and in its empty sockets, a black blankness. It is the devil, no doubt, here on our kitchen table like a vase. It vibrates, I can almost hear its ancient bleats every time I look around, make tea, load the dishwasher, stack plates. It is there, majestic, in stasis, weird exhibit. I'll take it to show her, he says when he returns, meaning our 2-year-old who has been asking about bones can smell death in the house. She runs in, her teething cheeks hot and red. Mama, the baba doesn't need its head anymore. The 3 of us and the ram. Its presence, a whisper from the future, stubborn yes and unapologetic. It is on the table even now. Tomorrow, it will disappear to his laboratory, but tonight, I can't stop thinking about those hollow orbs, the thin fragments of skull clinging together to give shape to an idea. The memory of another dead ram banished against rocks by the sea years ago when I was young, and I promised then I'd never write about it. But now I cannot help it. The ram has found me, freed itself from its bloated corpse, dragged itself across county bounds to bear witness to my mortality, to make me beg for release, make me beg for answers. Ram, silhouetted against all the objects, against all the light. Ram, who am I supposed to be in all this? The floral blinds, the recipe books, the porcelain floor tiles. Oh, Ram, let us bash our heads off them and weep. Thank you so much.
And folks, we're out of time, but that, and rightly so, because it was your words. I'd like to apologise if anybody was triggered by that Midlands comment earlier. Phil Lynch down the back there is ready for a fight. What can we say? Another round of applause. Absolutely amazing. So there are books here, there are books here, there are poets here, you're here, your money's here. Make it so. On behalf of the Bray Literary Festival, thanks so much for coming out. What 3 stars that we had here tonight, absolutely wonderful. Reminder, we're still on tomorrow. We see some of our wonderful poets here. We have Rosamond in the front and we have Colin down the back. And so tomorrow we have a jam-packed day as well. So and Phil Lynch has programs down the back there as well. And Dave, it's in the library, not here. And Claire Keegan is in the Mermaid. Thanks, folks. Have a lovely night.